Good morning, everybody. I'm Fabio Tomasi from Arisens Park. We are one of the partners of the Urban Transport Project. We are going to start now the webinar. Just a few recommendations for the audience. I kindly ask you to turn off your microphone and camera. Whenever you want to communicate with us or make a question to the speakers, please use the chat, the command menu at the bottom of the screen. So whenever you want to interact with us, do not hesitate. So, as I said, this webinar is organized by the urban transport community. So I will give a floor to Ms. Laia Viñas from MedCities, with the coordinator of the project, to introduce these initiatives. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Let me share my screen. Okay, hope everybody can see it now. Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Laia Viñas, project officer at MedCities, leading the urban transport community. I'm just gonna very briefly, and first of all, I wanted to thank everybody for making yourself available for this session, and to thank Area Science Park for leading on the organization of this first seminar of a series of webinars that the urban transport community will propose you for the coming weeks. The urban transport community is a horizontal project of the Interreg Med program. We've been active since 2016, and we gather 7 territorial cooperation projects, leading with different topics within sustainable mobility and involving more than 200 organizations, including cities, city councils, universities, knowledge centers, technology centers, etc., from across the Mediterranean area. Since 2019, we have gathered a new partnership behind this project for the next 2 years and a half. MedCities is leading, and we also have, for your information, and in case you know any of these entities, you know they are behind this initiative: Unimed, CVNet, Cyprus and Greece, Area Science Park, Codatu, Polis, and the municipality of Durrës. You can, I can post on the chat the ways you can reach out to us. You can know more about us. We will be happy to respond to your request for information. Let me share with you a bit the goals of our community for the next period, for the next years. After the first phase, the project now is looking at the replicability and the transferring of some of the good solutions and good practices that were tested during the previous phase. These will namely involve that the project has started by selecting a number of these solutions that are not only interesting for their successes, but they are also interesting in terms of their replicability potential. So we are studying, and we have analyzed the factors that make these solutions easily could make them easily to undertake by other territories. Once these solutions have been selected, and to concretely support their replicability across the Med region, the project will support, will launch a call for mentoring to support the actual adaptation and study of the key factors that enable these solutions to be successful, to adapt them to new territories. How we aim to do that, and how can you know more about it? So as I was saying, this today is the first webinar of a series of webinars that will follow in the next weeks. You have probably seen in the registration form that we sent you the different topics that we'll be tackling. Today is a particular session because it addresses a particular transversal topic, like the one of the COVID impacts on mobility. But we will be, and I won't go into detail into them, but just to give you an overview in case you did not have the time to go through them in the registration form, know that you can receive again this registration form and select the seminars, the webinars that you would like to attend. And basically we'll be leading with, we'll be discussing big data and smart traffic management on the 21st. Next week, we are having a seminar in which we will do a more general introduction to the project offerings and the opportunities that this call for mentoring can be of interest for you. And then, as I was saying, every Wednesday morning time will be tackling this different thematic focus of our project. And we are, of course, inviting you to attend these different webinars. Of course, you are not obliged to this is not a course. You can really register for any topic of your interest. Let me just say that in each webinar we'll have both an expert keynote speaker to introduce the topic, and the direct presentations by the implementers of the replicable solutions. So you will have the chance to talk to public entities, city councils, etc., that have developed a number of these solutions. And basically, the call for sustainable urban transports implementing cities, our call for mentoring, will be launched this month of October. If you wish to know more about it, I suggest you contact us through the help desk of the call. I will post the link on the chat, and there you can, in case you're interested to know more, you can raise your interest, you can express your interest, and we'll follow you in a bilateral contact to provide you more information. To avoid, basically this call entails an expert-based support for your entity to not only know and learn about how it worked in our what we call pioneer cities, but an expert-based support to analyze how to adapt these success factors to your context. I'm not going to go into more detail, but again, if you want to know more, send us a message through the help desk, which is basically a Google form that it gives us the first contact point to give you more information. And before I close, just let me invite you, the registration deadline for the European Week of Regions and Cities has been postponed until the 14th of October. So you still have time to register for this event, and particularly to attend our session that we will focus on sustainable mobility in touristic destinations. This is one of our main topics, and we invite you to be there to know more while you participate with us every week to the webinars of your interest. I will leave it there. I hope this seminar is of your interest, and I wish you a good session.
Thank you very much, Laia, for your introduction to the urban transport community. So let's share the agenda of the meeting for today. So we decided to start this series of webinar with a topic that unfortunately is very hot at the moment, which is the COVID emergency. Perhaps during summer, we hope to be out of the emergency, but the autumn, the beginning of autumn is suggesting that unfortunately this emergency will be still a very relevant topic. And the pandemic had also an impact on the mobility. We had the lockdowns where people were closed in cities. Then we went back, were closed in their homes. Then we went back to work. And not surprisingly, we find that they changed their behavior. One of the most clear data that is getting out from various research is that they are using less and less public transport. So the fact is how these people that is not moving anymore by public transport because they fear to get infected, how will they move? By private cars, by bike? And this can have a tremendous impact on the sustainability of our cities. So the decision on how to move will probably depend on how cities and government will react to this emergency. So what we would like to do is to explore this point, and we have two panelists, Mario Fava from the Local South Council Association Malta, which will present what they are going to do in their country. And then we are going to have also a European perspective with the introduction by Ivo Crea, who has been one of the authors of the topic guide on managing mobility in a pandemic scenario, which is one of the attachment of the SMP guidelines. But there's another aspect that is relevant when we are speaking about urban mobility and the COVID emergency, is smart working. Smart working has not been invented recently, but it has become wide use during the pandemic. We changed the way to work. Is this going to be a permanent change? And if this is a permanent change, would this positive for urban mobility, for sustainability? So there we have Valerio Piras from Euromobility, which will present a study that has been done in Italy with a wide survey. And I think that the results are really interesting, not just for Italy. I think that at the end, the reactions of other people across Europe will be very similar to those in Italy. After that, we are going to have a round table. So I can really kindly invite you to ask questions and contribute to the debate after the presentation. And by the way, we are also going to get your point of view during the presentation using Mentimeter with some questions. So I kindly ask you to connect to www.menti.com and digit the code 269169 You have the direct link in the chat, and you have also the QR code. Okay, we start with a simple question, just to get you familiar with the tool. So, where are you now? Where are you now? Please answer. So most of you apparently are at home, or there's a lucky one on the beach, despite the weather is not so good, at least here in Trieste. Okay, and after you have answered to this first question, just to get familiar with the tool, just to know who you are, please also feel answer also to this other question. During our webinars, we will ask you later on further questions. We will share the results, and I hope that your feedback will help in animating the discussion during the webinar. So it's time to give floor to the first presenter, Mr. Mario Fava from the Association of Municipalities in Malta. And you have developed some guidelines for managing mobility in a sustainable way during the pandemic and after it. So the floor is yours, Mr. Fava.
Thank you, Mr. Tomasi, and good morning to all. Well, we were asked to contribute in this meeting a couple of days ago, so we gladly accepted the invitation to explain what we as an association for local councils are doing in Malta. Going back to October 2019, we realized it was very important to have a national policy or vision for all the local councils in Malta. By the way, we have 68 localities in Malta and 5 regional committees. To launch this vision, we did research and we came up with the idea to tag this vision residents first. We believe that the main role of each and every councillor should be the resident and to better the quality of life of each resident. So we came up with 4 major pillars, which are sustainable mobility, green environment, open spaces, and smart cities. And under each and every category, there are different other topics such as walkability, last mile transportation, shared transport, environment infrastructure, clean air, alternative energy, cleanliness, open markets, and so on. So after we launched that vision and we explained it throughout the country, then we went on and started working on it. And we have this project now, we call it Slow Streets, which is part of the sustainable mobility pillar, which we are implementing as we speak. The concept of public space and mobility is a new reality in order to bring back our daily lives to our localities. As we know, the pandemic restricted most of our residents from going out, especially vulnerable people and disabled people. So we wanted to do something to give back our localities to the people. So as we learned to live in this current reality, more residents are going out onto our streets day to day, and the mobility is flowing back gradually to restore our localities. So as an association, together with the Ministry for Transport, we worked on an action plan to make sure that this mobility is safe, sustainable, healthy, and efficient. The aim is to promote walking, cycling, and the use of public transport in parallel with other educational campaigns to avoid unnecessary travel. To achieve this, a series of temporary interventions are being required to ensure that our localities are as safe as possible now and in the coming weeks. So we asked all the local councils who is interested to participate, and we have 55 out of 68 taking part in this project. It is very encouraging because usually the number is quite lower than that, but the percentage is quite high in this regard. So we were very satisfied with the commitment that the localities are showing towards their residents. So within this context, travel on foot and by bicycle for a short and medium distance will continue to the main recommended ways of getting around in our localities. Obviously, travel by public transport is also recommended, and our buses are continuing to operate throughout the emergency situation, even now, all over the island, and great efforts are being made to comply with the maximum occupancy level and to ensure that all the necessary hygiene measures are being adopted. So the question is, who will gain from such a project, from such initiative? Definitely our residents. Our residents and their well-being are at the center of this project because, as I said before, the mental and physical health of the most vulnerable is at the top of our priorities, and we reopen our localities. Definitely, then our elderly and disabled, as I said before, will be able to enjoy a short walk throughout their beautiful historic villages and urban cores. And the main objective is to try to make people realize that instead of using their private car, they have alternative modes of transport, such as walking, the use of bicycle, e-scooters, and so on. As we know, we saw several pictures in the past months where we saw cities all around the world, especially in China, but even in Europe, the difference of the quality of air when everybody was acting as normally before the pandemic, using our private cars and everything. And when we had to lock down, and then we couldn't use or go out, and we couldn't use our private cars. So we could see the difference even in the quality of air. And this is something which is very important to us. And we believe that even though things are, so to speak, getting back to normal, we should take whatever positive there was in this pandemic and adopt it in our new norm. So even local businesses will be part of this project, because walkability provides more business opportunities, as more people will enjoy easy access to the commercial areas. And without any doubt, our local businesses are an integral part of our communities, and we need to support them and try to support them even in this delicate situation. Without any doubt, residents will be encouraged to shop from local businesses by extending the open space and pedestrian space, so that there will be more local shopping hubs where people can stroll and enjoy their shopping. Even our society as a whole, because walkability increases our social interaction, even at a distance at times, and there will be more diversity of public life, and it will also increase the well-being and enhance collective security and safety. But ultimately, we also believe that even the central governments will gain from such a project, because as we know, walkability improves the public health and creates more connected and therefore stronger communities. Physical exercise has been widely recommended to improve even the resistance against this pandemic. So it is important to explain also the different types of routes we are considering, to give an example so that you will be able to understand better what we are saying. We are trying to connect different routes, especially, or for example, hospitals and clinics and pharmacy routes, shopping and commercial routes, exercise routes for the everyday use, scenic and hiking routes for weekends, for families to be able to go out and enjoy the outdoor and our urban environment as well, and social routes such as picnics and playing, and also routes so that children in our locality will be able to walk to school instead of using the public transport or the transport provided by the schools. We believe that the better the conditions and the more activity that occurs in our locality, the easier it will be for people to gain their confidence again and be able to go out and try to live in a better way in this different environment that we are living in because of this pandemic. So in a nutshell, that is what we are doing now in Malta. And hopefully these temporary measures eventually will end up being permanent, so that we will enjoy, as I said, this initiative even when this pandemic is over. That is all from my end, Mr. Tomasi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fava. Since Mr. Fava has to leave due to other engagement, if you would like to ask a question to him about the very interesting actions that they have launched in Malta, please ask now in the chat. By the way, in the chat, you can find also the link to the document that they have developed in the frame of the project, Slow Streets. You can download from them, and I really invite you to do so because it's a very interesting document. In the meantime, that you think if you have any question.
What we will do as well, because as you know, we have a very short notice, but later on today, I will email you the presentation and the relative documents and slideshows. So please, you will be able to share it with our members as well. So it will be easier for them, and they can also, if they have any questions, they can also email us, and we will gladly get back to them and explain in further detail what we are presenting here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fava. In the meantime, for those that have just joined, please, in the chat, you can find the link to Mentimeter, and you can still fill in just to have an overview of the answer. It seems that we have a lot of people, both from City Council and NGO. I kindly invite you to fill in and to take part, because we have also other questions to you, which would be relevant. We know that the pandemic has been hard, more or less hard some cities rather than others, and so I kindly ask you to fill in this question just to understand what has been the experience of our audience. You can answer the slides, also those that have been closed, because then at the end, when we have the roundtable, we will back to them. So even if I move to a further slide after, before you have provided your answer, don't be worried. You can still go back and give your question to the answer. So the second question is how you imagine that each means of transport will be affected by the COVID experience. So even in the long term, many are wondering if changes will be permanent, because this is a dramatic event that probably will change the mindset. So you have to give your feedback on each of them. Okay, people are answering that question. Okay, the situation is evolving, but yeah, we see that what people is substantially imagining is that, as we say, the beginning public transport is suffering. but I see that you are substantially positive with most of the people considering that going by bike or walking will be the most likely solution. Okay, we will go back to this question later. A new one. Which solution you suggest for managing urban mobility in a pandemic context? This is an open question, so you can write a short test. Yeah, your answer coming. Walking and cycling is apparently the solution that this is the last one is more related. Okay, next question, but as I said, you can also give your answer later on. In this case, you have to rate by moving the different possibility, making a ranking. Which of the following measures do you think are most useful with dealing with a pandemic? Increase the number of public transport vehicles to allow social distancing on board, reserve free parking for emergency operator, pop-up bike lanes, so bike lanes that are realized in emergency quickly, promoting smart working, incentives for buying bicycles, light and or lighting car restriction. Okay. So we can move to the following. That regarding urban logistic and commerce. During lockdown, we had a significant increase of e-commerce. This change the way people buy, sometimes by emergency. But again, this was already a trend that probably was being strengthened due to the pandemic. And how can be the impact? So again, okay. Next question. Okay, this is for later. Okay, so it's time to move to the following presentation by Mr. Ivo Crea from Polis, which is an association of cities, a partner of the urban transport project. And Mr. Ivo Crea has been one of the author of these guidelines for developing SMP or adapting SMP in a time of a pandemic. I have been impressed by the quick reactions to the emergency, since it was almost a real-time work. So I'm really very interested on these guidelines. So Ivo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fabio, and thank you for inviting us to present this. We're happy we're a partner in the Urban Transport HP project, and happy to contribute also with this kind of information, which is a product of the Brussels bubble, let's call it that way. The European Commission was looking for a way to quickly brief cities and regions about a response, a good response in the field of urban mobility in the time of exiting the first wave of COVID-19. And we have worked with a number of EU projects on a document, and I'll talk about this, but I'll also give a bit of background to the document. So indeed, we wanted to write of how cities have responded to the COVID-19 crisis as an immediate response, but mainly actually the way they have to face the new reality and the new challenges coming out of the lockdown, or as we see currently, entering a permanent state of having to deal with uncertainty in society that also reflects in urban mobility. So it's the first time in our lives, I think, that we see this direct link between mobility needs and health and safety concerns. We have seen that cities are very creative in finding solutions and working with the new reality. But we also see that the cities who have a planning culture and have a plan in place, let's say a menu of measures they had in mind already, they could activate to solve problems that came with COVID-19, have done even better than other cities. Bit of philosophy maybe before we start talking about the topic guide, the practitioner's briefing itself. Is the fact that if we look at, and also me myself as a professional, if I look at of what topics we have addressed in urban mobility from the perspective of the three objectives of the sustainable mobility paradigm: planet, people, profit. We have very much focused on planet and people. We have talked about accessible mobility, safe mobility, road safety, and we have talked about curbing negative external effects in view of climate, in view of environment, air quality. But this, and when we talk about economy, it's mainly in view of access, but also in view of curbing congestion and travel time loss and these kind of issues. But we are now, for the first time, faced with a situation that we also have to see urban mobility as a really important driver to get our cities going again, to get our economies going again. And I think for the Mediterranean region, specifically the issue of tourism as an important economic sector comes into mind then, from living in a country where the sun never shines. That makes us dream if we think about the Mediterranean region. And I have a couple of thoughts about this because it's quite it's something that comes to the forefront. But first, I want to show a slide that we have compiled from a survey we have done with our members, 84 cities and regions in Europe, where probably a similar image will come from your mentee exercise, Fabio. The idea that cities expect and see a negative effect on public transport. So the overall use has plunged, and also an increase of walking and cycling, and the active modes have really taken off. We noticed that in bike sales, for instance, which are really peaking across Europe. And we also see now, this is a survey that was held before 2.5 months ago. This is at the moment we see, when it comes to car use, we see an increase. So the car is back to the levels of before the crisis, and even heavier. Then a couple of thoughts about tourism. We understand from a lot of cities that actually they manage their cities at the moment, including the urban mobility systems. They manage to keep up because there are far less numbers of tourists in big tourist attractor cities. This is an example of Ljubljana. In the deep of the lockdown, they said, like, yeah, we actually manage with our public transport system because we don't have the surplus of people in the streets and in the public transport that normally visit our city. And on the longer run, we also notice that that people are moving into the car for tourist destinations. And people with planes, it's been problematic. All know the situation, but people also move away from trains and coach as long distance travel options, and that will translate in another travel behavior for the mid and long distance market segment. It's a market segment we don't take into account sufficiently when we talk about urban mobility, where we mainly talk about local trips. But I think it's good to look into this, because the solutions for this market segment are different. The city will change also if the current international entry points are not used for that purpose anymore. So we need to rethink also the accessibility and the urban mobility system for the people who want to visit our cities that are not local, but are coming from a bit further. Just a thought that could be of interest for your region. I'm speeding up a bit because I talk too much. I don't see a lot of people because I'm at home. So when I can talk, I make most use of it. We have seen respacing and rescaping of our streets because in the lockdown we have seen this huge drop of cars also made it very apparent that so much urban space is dedicated to cars, and cities have really taken public space back to cater for pubs and restaurants, to cater for different uses, pop-up bike lanes, widening of pedestrian areas. And in the back you see a map of Milano provided by rendered by an Italian company, Systematica, who have created a map of streets where social distancing is actually possible, and that's the green ones, and the red ones show where the current pedestrian infrastructure does not allow for a safe crossing of your fellow citizen if you walk past them in the streets. Yeah, so bicycles have been really picking up with cities, for instance, Rome as an example, but also the Ile-de-France region surrounding Paris, where they actually have doubled the metro and regional rail network with bicycle lanes to provide a visible solution that people can understand in terms of wayfinding, but also helps to take people out of public transport that free up spaces also for public transport users who really have no alternatives. Very smart system. And of course, you also see new mobility services that are returning or have been in service. And also there is this discussion like which audiences can these services actually support, and is this also something that different market segments in the city, using the city or visiting the city, will use, for instance, tourists. So then returning to the practitioners briefing, the idea was really to summarize lessons learned until June 2020. The document was published early July, which seems like an eternity by now, but it was one of the first documents that actually made a summary of a lot of best practice, where several organizations, including Polis, have been gathering best practice examples of how cities have planned and acted in view of COVID-19. The project, as I said, this was an group work with several Civitas projects, and also with the under review of the International Transport Forum and the European Public Health Alliance. So we needed a good overview, oversight of this publication, because this in the end also touches upon real risks that can cost people their lives. So we had to be sure that the content was also in line with the current health advice, for instance. The document talks about how mobility has changed, how attitudes have changed, how behavior has changed, but also describes how which challenges are ahead. And we see at that time already we understood that there would be a serious decrease in usage of public transport, and an expected increase of car usage, and with that also congestion. So that measures not only can be seen at the offer side, but also need to manage travel demand. We also saw the surgence of e-commerce, but also the fact that logistics chains actually were kept in place, and that this has been one of the elements that has also been supporting our society, is the fact that we had food in our shops and that we could maintain a level of economic activity in the deep of the lockdown. So the document, and you can find it online. The document is, I will post the link also in the chat in a minute. The document is building on 3 topics that were identified by the European Commission of being of importance, and they also have been giving some headline advice on public transport, shared mobility, and cycling and walking and reallocation of space. And we made these 3 topics a bit more concrete, always mentioning immediate actions, midterm actions, but also long-time considerations. We added good practices, and we have also identified a long series of references, because we also understand that this is a fast-moving target, the advice we want to give, and there are organizations, projects that keep up-to-date information available on their websites. The second part of the document is then dedicated to how we see sustainable urban mobility planning in this in this regard. So because this is a crisis, a catastrophe in the literal sense of the word, it changes abruptly our normal way of behaving. And for urban mobility, the urban mobility community, this means working on a crafting and a carefully shaped sustainable urban mobility plan, and then bringing that plan into operation, deploying services, investing in infrastructures, and working with people to create a more sustainable urban mobility environment. But this has been disrupted, of course, but as I said, we also see that where there was a planning culture and where there were structures in place to implement the SUMP, the response has been coordinated and more efficient. But we also understand that we need a more agile planning, and that's what we also describe in the brochure. You know the SUMP cycle, and in the brochure we identify for several of the areas in the SUMP approach. We identify what is different under COVID-19 and what can be done. And this translates then in a more agile approach, and a more immediate approach to the planning, looking at cooperation and engagement, strategy development, measure planning, implementation, and evaluation and monitoring. And for all of these areas in the or steps in the SUMP cycle, there is information. What is next? This document is about 25 pages of content, and we were asked by the Commission from the start to work on 2 documents. So this immediate response document to be issued shortly after the Commission had issued its own recommendations on how to cope with COVID-19 in urban mobility, and detailing these recommendations. We are now working on a longer document, which is called in the SUMP guidance jargon a topic guide. The plan is to have that issued by January 2021. And the plan is that is taking COVID-19 into account to write about resilience in cities in times of crisis. So we are looking at a more a broader document where we try to link the SUMP approach to other crises and other disruptors that will arrive, looking at more a more interactive process also with other projects, and if there's an interest from this community to join the drafting process, that is most welcome. We also are moving in writing this document from a deductive to an inductive process. The idea that we have the initial practitioner's briefing was based on a synthesis of a lot of best practice and trying to draw some common conclusions from the massive amount of creativity from cities, where we are now in a process where several organizations have made their assessment of the situation and have issued guidelines, and we will work with that to make a synthesis of that work. We also want to move away from the EU a little bit and see what has happened elsewhere in the world on this topic. And we are also adding measure areas. You've seen in the previous slides that we talked in this document about parking, about shared mobility, collective or public transport, and cycling, walking. But there are other areas that have been affected and can play a role in resilience of cities, access regulations, parking, urban logistics, and many more. So if you want to join the process, let me know. We have a sounding board group for the document, so we're happy to invite you to that. For the full document, that is currently online, I will post the link in a minute. But it was also shared with the invitation, I understand. So please have a look there. So that's what I had to say. And I also want to give full credit to my colleague Laura Babio, who has worked on the presentation as well as on the document. So it's always teamwork.
Thank you very much, Ivo, for your presentation. I think it's very interesting. You raised several points that I hope that we can discuss later in the round table, and hope there will be contributions also from the audience. So getting back to Mentimeter, we have some further question for you. For those that just joined, there's a link in the chat for connecting to Mentimeter, or in case go to www.menti.com and use the code that you see on the slides, which is 26916998. Also, we are asking you something about your personal experience with smart working. Okay, so we have a couple of questions for you. Very quickly. Just define your experience in a single word. So we see different feelings arising, some positive and something negative. Okay, so we will be back to this later because I think that is interesting to see how people reacted. Obviously, it's not a large scale survey, but it could be still a good point to start a discussion. This is what you expect to do in your future. And finally, this question that I kindly ask to Phil, and well, I will now give floor to Mr. Valerio Piras from Euro Mobility. Well, this is just a game that we are doing this sort of survey, whereas in your case, you made a very large scale survey in Italy. So we have some more significant results to share and some more in-depth consideration that I kindly ask to share with the audience. So Mr. Piras, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Tomasi, for inviting us and thinking about us. Yeah, we did a rather large survey encompassing all of Italy. So I'll present you some results. First of all, hello to everyone. I've seen some familiar faces who already know who we are, and we're Euro Mobility. That's called Euro Mobility in Italian, even if it's not an Italian word. We love English words and we love to pronounce them in Italian, so it's called Euro Mobility. And we conducted a survey on smart working. As you all know, Italy has been the first European country to face COVID, and as such, a nationwide lockdown, which we later named Phase 1, Fase 1, started mid-March, in the month of March, and lasted roughly until May. And during that Phase 1, basically everyone who could work from home started doing it. So we started from 0% smart working, which we also know it's not called smart working outside of Italy, but as I already said, we love English words, so it's smart working in Italy. And we started from 1% of workers who work from home, and we reached quite higher numbers. So we conducted surveys on smart working in companies, businesses, and public authorities during Phase 1, so during the lockdown. First of all, this is an interesting indicator because women participated strongly to our survey and also to other surveys, similar surveys on the same matter. There's some messages in the chat, maybe. Okay, thank you. So women participated strongly because they have to deal with children and you know, maybe other things at home. We still have this separation of roles in Italy. So women are more interested to smart working because it meets their interests more. Regarding the age, we can see that we have a low participation from younger workers, but maybe due to a lower level of employment. So they don't work, they don't answer to our survey. Let's talk a bit. We already said that before COVID, we had a small percentage of workers who worked in smart working, who worked from home, but there's a higher percentage of people who tried smart working, even only for one time in their working life. And that's a higher percentage than expected, because as I said, we had something, the ballpark of 0.1% workers in smart working, but 16% of them tried smart working at least one time in their working life. 3/4 of the respondents had no change in any aspect of the work during phase 1 of the COVID lockdown. So we had a rather high percentage of people who, despite being put in smart working from one day to the other, they didn't see any change in any aspect of the work, including the working hours, salary, tasks, and other. Otherwise, the other 1/4 of the people had some changes, mainly working hours, because sometimes we had what we call telework, which is smart working with the same working hours. And a lot of times, instead, we had a pure smart working, so people had changes to their working hours, had to make themselves available in other hours. So this has been the most recurrent change. Regarding COVID, despite the difficulties, and we'll see more of them, despite the changes, a lot of people, 90% of respondents, would like to keep working from home, even when the pandemic ends. Some of them say they want to do it as much as possible, so they are available to work only smart working, and half of them say that they're available to work with limits, in smart working with limits, so maybe only some days of the week. And the remaining 11% highlighted one or more issues, the most recurrent of them being the absence of direct contact. Of course, there's a lot of works you can't do in smart working. You can't do from home because you have to be in direct contact with your clients or even with colleagues. Let's talk about smart working before COVID again, but in companies. So these questions asked to the respondents if they knew if their company or their business already provided its employees the opportunity to work from home before COVID struck. And we see that 20% of them doesn't know if their business allowed them already to work from home. Regarding the balance between private life and work life, a lot of people say it changed for the better. So smart working from home had a positive effect on their life. But we can't ignore the 7% of the respondents that think that working from home have worsened or could worsen the conciliation between their lives, private life and work life. It's only apparently a low percentage, but it represents a large number, so we need to keep an eye on it. Regarding travel costs, we had a strong reduction in 70% for 70% of the respondents. Of course, if we don't have a reduction, we also don't have an increase, so it's almost a win-win situation. Regarding difficulties, we have higher percentages of people who had difficulties in working. We already saw it in Menti's results. And the adequacy of tools is the stronger obstacle, but we also have to remember that smart working in Italy was adopted almost from one day to the other. So it's only natural that tools aren't adequate, that connections aren't good. We don't have good connections in Italy. And several other issues and difficulties arose, but we can be proud of the 61% who didn't have any difficulty. We have another 61%, but this time it's negative because this 61% didn't receive any IT preparation from the company. And as we already said, of course, this is due to the short time between the first signs of the pandemic and the start of the lockdown, which I believe it's been 2 weeks. So no business, no company has been able to adapt, has been able to prepare to smart working. Regarding communication with the company, we don't see any interesting data from these answers. And because we've been able to communicate easily with phones and smartphones, and also emails and PC programs. Regarding satisfaction, despite all the difficulties, despite the lack of IT preparation, we see that overall satisfaction reaches high levels. We're over 90%, and this is, as expected, comparable with the availability to keep working from home, which we saw in one of the first slides. Let's talk a bit about mobility, because we're called Euromobility for a reason. We operate in the fields of mobility management and sustainable mobility, so we just had to ask something about home-to-work trips for respondents to our survey. So 2 out of 3 respondents used their car for their home-to-work trips before COVID. Whether alongside other people and or in combination with other modes, they used their car for their home-to-work trips. These are the other modes. We see that there's half of the respondents who use other modes, so half of the 32% used public transport, followed by bike, foot, and other modes, which include combinations of these of the represented modes. Let's talk a bit about duration of travels. So roughly 50% of all home-to-work trips last between 10 and 30 minutes, while another 30% lasts between 30 and 60 minutes. So we have that 80%, almost 90% is under 1 hour. And we also have a strong representation of how long journeys, because we have 12% which take between 1 and 2 hours. This is the modal shift after COVID. So this question was asking if you plan to change mode after COVID, and the majority of the respondents said that their modal choice will stay the same. Let's talk about people who will shift their modal choice. And we see that there's a lot of public transport users, which of course don't feel it safe regarding, of course, the possibility to get COVID. And we also see a strong presence of car users, which maybe is due to the fact that they tried sustainable modes during the pandemic, and they plan to use it also when the COVID ends. Let's talk travel time savings. So considering only the effects of a permanent adoption of smart working by people who explicitly declared their availability in our survey to keep working from home, these are the potential travel time savings for all modes. And these are the ones for car and motorcycle users only. So we see a higher percentage for trips with mid durations from 5 to 29 minutes. It's not good that we see a higher percentage for 5-9 minutes, because it means that people use their car for trips they could do by bike or by foot, but we know we're in Italy and people are really affectionate to their car. So some data and outcomes. I'll read the chat later so I can see if there's some questions. Some data. Average daily savings amount to 32 minutes per person per day, so half an hour per day per person, which equates to roughly 8 kilometers per day. And this is considering both the home to work and the work to home trips. If we consider only private motorized modes users, so car and motorcycle users, these figures are slightly lower, but still above 100 hours per year per person, which equates to 1,500 kilometers. Let's go to some estimates. Economist Tito Boeri estimated roughly 1/4 of workers, which equates to 5.5 million, could work from home, even at the end of the pandemic, while Eurostat goes even higher with 7-8 million, depending on teachers being included or not. So crossing Boeri's safer estimate and the answers to Euromobility's survey, the following global daily savings can be estimated, and they're similar to other surveys that have been conducted. So we're quite sure these are not, fantastic numbers which can't be really reached. So these are our estimates for a wider adoption of smart working in Italy only, and their daily savings, and we see that numbers are really high, and we think that, as it said from the name of the presentation itself, that we can learn something, we can take something from this pandemic. Maybe and surely smart working isn't the only solution, as public transport isn't the only solution, cycling isn't the only solution. So nothing is the only solution to the mobility problems, but smart working can surely help in having more sustainable cities and companies. So thank you for attention, and I leave you with this message, you see, in Italian, which translates to: the experience of today is an opportunity for tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Valerio.
Thank you, Fabio.
Okay, so in the meantime, we had some interesting questions and comments from the audience. So I would start from the comments from the audience and specifically to those that are related to the last presentation, to smart work and working from home. The first one is whether about companies that would rather not prefer working from home due to trust issues, such as employer being unsure if the employees would actually be working, if any, not sure if it's a thing for you all. So this was one of the comments that we get from the audience. I don't know, Valerio, if you wish to comment on that.
Well, it's true. It's true that may be the case for some companies. Our estimates came only from data from employees, so we didn't factor in availability from companies and businesses to effectively put their employees in smart working after the pandemic ends. So it's an estimate which only factors in data from employees, but it surely is a thing. It surely is a thing.
Okay, so then I don't know if perhaps Mr. Nathan Tan that made the question prefer to make them directly, or if prefer me to make the questions. In case you want to do directly, please activate your microphone if you agree. Okay, so I will read. Okay, so Another question for Valerio is equity factor into these model surveys, such as those who can only rely on public transport and other non-car modes and not switch to cars?
Well, this is particular situation which wasn't treated in the survey. The survey was focused on smart working in all its aspects, so mobility was only a part of the survey, and we couldn't give space to peculiar situations. And combining the various answers to the various questions, maybe we can find that a lot of public transport users won't switch to car, but that wasn't the focus, so we didn't ask anything about this. It surely is interesting because, you know, they are kind of being forced on public transport or other non-safe modes, but we didn't have the chance to put it in our surveys. Otherwise, the number of questions would grow to a higher amount, and we would have a lower percentage of respondents.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Ivo, just I was wondering if in the guide you consider also smart working, or that was not part of your analysis?
No, but it will have to be for the longer document. I mean, it's so impactful on the way our society is currently moving, and also how it's also linked to e-commerce, for instance. The fact that people are at home during the day also enables deliveries, etc. And there is a strong link with public transport, in the sense that at the moment the services are not adapted to teleworking or partial teleworking. I noticed that from my own experience. It's never good to bring in personal anecdotes, but I mean, there is no product of my rail company that allows me to travel now and then on a subscription basis. I have to buy single tickets, which also makes it very complex for public transport operators to understand cash flow, to understand how much passengers they can expect when and how they will pay. So it's it's all linked, and we should address that in the new document we're working on.
Yeah, uncertainty is a peculiar feature of this time. Also, well, it's not strictly related, but also having to the first data on tourism during this summer, it saw a definite increase in last minute booking of holidays, meaning also that also long distance transport operator are facing problems in planning advance. Yeah, there's another question from the audience, this time for Ivo. I would ask you to answer, which is related to pop-up bike lanes, which was perhaps a feature of this emergency. They have sometimes been accepted and sometimes not very much welcome. And the question is, or the comment rather than the question is, perhaps that we should work more on reducing demand and shifting it elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the in the document there is a section on walk active modes and space reallocation. I think what is important is to measure, either to understand whether the experiments that are put in place, the temporary infrastructure or with markings or bollards or whatever, the temporary bike lanes that have been put in place, you have to assess whether they are used and useful. And it's also not, I mean, an experiment or a temporary measure. It's not a disgrace to turn it back and to try something else. I mean, I think that's clear. What people need to understand is that that in most cities in Europe, we are very close or above saturation of any transport network, being it the car network or the public transport network, and that with a decrease of a small shift of public transport to car use, you actually enter into gridlock. You enter into a situation that's really bad in terms of congestion. And I think that's why really this active modes push and also putting in place temporary bike lanes is a very smart way to keep cities accessible, to compensate for the loss in trust in public transport, but also in availability of public transport services. We are 4 as a network. We've seen marvelous things happen in cities. There's also clearly a demand, a latent demand that has been unlocked for cycling in locations that nobody had expected. But you have to measure, and there are very good and simple tools for measuring the use of cycle lanes and the actual evaluation of the use.
Yeah, thank you very much. Larry, I see that you wish also to make a question, if you can ask it directly. Or in case, okay, so the question is, what will be the impact of COVID on inclusivity and accessibility of mobility? Teleworking mostly happens for high qualified workers, and active mobility can be used for part of the, not all. What should be the response from the mobility departments for our elderly or workers not able to work from home? Perhaps I think that both of you can give an answer. I don't know who wish to start. Valerio, the first.
Yeah, as I already said earlier, smart working isn't the only solutions. There's no only single solution to the mobility problems. So, of course, also thinking about our elderly or workers that can't work from home for several reasons, we have to think about alternatives which can't be active mobility for everyone. So public transport, shared mobility, active mobility, and smart working have to work together to provide alternatives to the private car. But we can't focus on only one or two of them and think that anyone can adapt to those modes.
Thank you. Ivo,
the document also has the example of Madrid, who has had a specific campaign on accessibility in times of COVID. So a campaign under the heading "We Believe in Your Autonomy." So the idea that also people with disabilities should be able to move in these days, and that specific measures should be taken in public transport for that group. Of course, there is also the issue of what we have called in the last 6-7 months priority journeys or necessary journeys. the idea that people who need to get to work in care, for instance, or in the health sector, are the ones that really need public transport in certain moments but that was during the lockdown. I think so there is a public responsibility to make sure that those who need to get who cannot work from home, who need to be in their workplace, have different options to get to that place. I think I would like to add to the issue of mobility of the elderly, for instance, the issue of isolation. And we see that in this case the opposite of mobility really is being alone and being isolated, and it is at least in my country, it is an unbelievably painful. It has been very painful and had been very problematic the way that the elderly have been left alone. And I think we should, in any next wave, or we should take action on this and providing through the mobility sector solutions for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's also interesting to see in relation to this, to the comments that we get from the audience on the suggested mobility. As we can see that they are related to active mobility as cycling and walking, but there's also what is underlined is the reshaping of cities and to give more room for people, because we know that it's not just banning cars from some areas, it's really about rethinking. Perhaps we didn't need the COVID to do this exercise. This is something that could be done. Yvonne, you wish to add something?
Yes, indeed. I think what we see is a really a difference in cities in size. So you have, or in capacity, let's say there are cities which have all the digital tools, the models, the traffic counters, the data to also make very detailed forecasts of how specific changes in cities will affect mobility. And so cities like the ones that I've talked about, Madrid, Rome, Paris, they have models that allow to really calculate what the impact will be of taking away a lane to for cars, to make that into a cycle lane. I mean, they have an understanding of the actual impact. For smaller cities or cities who are less used to work with data for these purposes and modeling the impacts, this becomes a risk. Yeah, it's a political risk, a practical risk, a technical risk to suddenly change the layout of your streets. And it's this is something we really notice, the idea that that you have this asymmetry in knowledge between different authorities, which also puts the focus of attention much more on what was part of the first question on bicycle lanes, on the risk, whether something will work, the politician who has made the decision and who has to face failure maybe. So that's something which also needs to be solved by learning from each other. Cities exchanging on these practices, seeing what works, understanding what didn't work. So that's something where also this group can work from that perspective.
Yeah, and in this perspective, there's also some of the audience from the audience that is asking if you could clarify the difference between the short and the long guide that you mentioned.
yeah, that was very much from the from the then current the view we had in May, June, when we were drafting the document. We had this idea that we were coming out of the first wave, let's say, thanks to the measures that were taken, and that we had that we were in a phase where cities had to take action for 2-3 months ahead, let's say, to bridge the summer start of the school year. But then also, and that would be the short term, let's say, but also then the longer term was 6, 7, 8 months ahead, planning for a phase entering until next spring, let's say, with including a potential second wave, which we are probably entering now, but also from the perspective that in this on the short term, what we noticed that was that budget wasn't really an issue for the local nor national level. All government levels have dug deep into their pockets, and spending was not an issue. Let's say what needed to be done had to be done. In the midterm, the longer term, we see that money is an issue. I mean that the idea that we cannot keep spending ad hoc, and that also after a phase where the let's say the budget minister or the budget vice mayor is also involved in managing a crisis, that these people are looking back now at what has been spent and are looking also at the future. This means that the measures have to be much more rational, have to be efficient, have to be have to really fit also the economic crisis that comes with the COVID crisis. So that is also a part, the difference between this short-term and the long-term issue. And we wrote in the document also a couple of things about starting really to think about money and about budget and how you how you look at this from that end.
Okay, thank you very much. Getting to the smart working, I have a question for Valerio, a couple of questions for Valerio. Oh, well, the first is, well, this is just an internal small survey sort of game with our attendees, but I see what is a feedback that honestly I also had with people know, which is a very different reaction from people about smart working. There are those enthusiastic and those that do not welcome very much working at home because they lack social relations, since we know most of us is spending most of their time at the workplace rather than at home or with friends, and so they miss the social relation that they could have if they work all the time work. And also yes, some people fears that if smart working is really widespread, this could led to a desertification of urban areas. So how would you comment, Valerio, to such point of view?
Yeah, it's quite clear that we have reactions, both really positive and really negative. It's quite a divisive matter. But we also saw that the overall satisfaction was very high in the end. Apart from the difficulties, the lack of technical support, which I see has been written by our audience today, So in the end, it doesn't fit all, but it does fit a lot of people. So we can't just ignore smart working because for someone it isn't the optimal solution. And it's obviously, how can I say it? We can't force smart working on people who can't do it due to whatever reason. So it's important that we enable it for people who want to do it, and that we find alternative solution for people who can't do it. Regarding cities, this is the chance to rethink space and give it again to people. So we don't have to send people going to work at their workplaces instead of home, because then we don't have people in city centers. This is impossible. We found a solution that allows us to have less cars, less travels, less not sustainable travels. So we can't ignore it and just send everyone again on their cars in the city centers. So we have to rethink space, give less space to cars and travels, and more space to people. Maybe people can start going to live again in city centers instead of going to live in suburbs and then commuting every day from home to work. So we just have to take something positive from the pandemic and from everything that has happened and that is still happening. So the difficulty can teach us something useful for the future, also for the normal future without COVID.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if there's any further contribution from the audience. I would try to sum up my personal lessons learned from today's discussion. From one side, unfortunately, I think that probably, as unfortunately, we are moving to a second wave of emergency. We need to act in advance. For the first time, especially those countries here in Europe that have been at first, I think that Italy, Spain, we were somehow caught in surprise. There was not clear indication how to deal. I remember a long discussion in February and early March. You should wear a mask or not. It's needed or it's not. You should lock down or not. So that was, I would say, a bit of panic, of chaos. Now we have accurate experience, so cities can plan in advance. And the same also for companies. I remember that here in Italy, for just one day, we were told, stay at home. That was somehow panic. I know people that should go almost clandestinely to recover their PC in the office. And later on, we get more familiar. So perhaps this thing to plan better for emergency. And on the other hand, another issue is that of the long-term planning. So the experience with COVID has been dramatic, but this could perhaps be an opportunity to rethinking our cities, to give more space to mobility and also to active mobility and to people, as Valerie said. So this is my personal lessons learned. Before we close, is anyone from the audience or the panelists that want to add some final remark? No? Okay.
Yeah, maybe just one last word. Just also speaking from the perspective of a network of cities, is the fact that cities have been really creative and have shown how marvelous the local level is at addressing problems, at immediately acting, at using all the resources they have at hand. And I would like to give the example of Madrid, like a city that has been really in the in the worst situations since long, in the past, in springtime, and they have changed the way of working. They have created task forces to solve issues. They had a group looking at how can we best make use of urban infrastructures in this context, including writing a guideline on how to make test centers from off-street garages. A very concrete thing, but so the idea to be creative, to think out of the box, to think across the departments, has solved the crisis, and cities have been really great at addressing problems, and they will have learned and will continue being so, I think.
Yeah, thank you. There's a comment from the audience with suggesting to separate this pandemic moment from the rest. Today, smart working is the best strategy to prevent health problems. In the future, it will be an important element to consider in the mobility planning activities, not a target to reach.
I believe this is a good message. We have to use smart working and not letting us be used by smart working. So it's a tool. We just have to learn how to use it properly.
Yeah. I think if I could make a comparison that this pandemic is like when there's an air incident. It's a tragedy, but it's something that could make us learn how to manage cities in a more healthier and more healthy way. So, okay, if there's no further comments, I think we can close here the webinar. So I would like to thank all the speakers for their presentation, and the audience for their active participation, their comments and contribution. And so thank you very much. I remind you that next webinar is next week, always on Wednesday, 14th, and please join us for the following webinars. Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.